This episode of Transmissions contains references to suicide. Two of the most influential bands in music history.
No one else sounds like Joy Division. They created their own sound.
It was an industrial, almost helpless, hopeless scenario that I listened to over and over and over.
There was a cold beauty about it that really touched me.
One incredible tale.
The audience would double, and then triple, and then quadruple.
Kabang! Machine guns, cocaine, criminals, people started dying.
I'm Elizabeth Alker, and this is Transmissions, the definitive story of Joy Division and New Order.
Well, some of the crowd are on the pitch.
Coming up in the final episode of the season, New Order stare into the abyss.
When I was doing stuff with New Order, I felt that it hurt. It felt like I was being hit with a stick.
But just when they think it's all over,
Bernard went one way, Ocky went that way, and me and Gillian built a studio in our garret and learnt how to write, TV tunes. And that was it. And then we've never heard from them till, when was it? Oh, the World Cup.
inspiration finds New Order in the unlikeliest of places.
I remember saying to Tony, is arrivederci an Italian word?
One last victory lap before the heroes of this story bid us goodbye.
In my life, I've been really lucky. I've been really lucky to be at the Sex Pistols' first gig in Manchester. I've been really lucky to watch post-punk give us another career. I've been really lucky to witness acid house and then go from acid house to Manchester. And I'm still here to tell the tale.
After headlining Reading in 1989, New Order decided to go their separate ways. It was the first time they'd ever taken a break. Their last album was still going gangbusters, but the band themselves had never been less engaged. Peter Hook.
I remember taking my daughter to Eaton Park on an afternoon out, and it was in the days of the big ghetto blasters, and this kid was walking past, and this music he had on was amazing. And I thought, oh my God. I thought, what is that? It's fantastic. How can I ever forget you? And I ran after him. And I stopped him and he was looking at me like that. And I said, what's this music, mate? I said, it's fantastic. He said, okay, it's Technique by New Order. And I was like, oh my God. I was that detached from it. Didn't even recognise the own bloody record.
As the decade drew to a close, the members of New Order were each pursuing their own projects outside of the band. Peter Hook was recording with Revenge, Stephen and Gillian were making film music as the other two, and Bernard was writing with Johnny Marr.
So I went to work with Johnny because he just split up with the Smiths. He'd been through a really traumatic time with a certain member of that group.
This fan fiction-esque collaboration had actually been in the works for a while. It's just that previously there hadn't been much space to get stuck in. Johnny Marr.
How it came about was, as I remember it, someone told me that Bernard was thinking of doing a solo record and that he was interested in doing some work with me and doing a couple of songs. So I went along to see the last night of the New Order and the Bunnymen tour, and we stayed up most of the night talking about it and planning it. And, it was quite an inspirational evening, really.
The project that eventually emerged from that conversation was called Electronic.
Well, with Electronic, I think there's two things going on, really. And it's a bit of pop psychology, but nevertheless, it is valid that, in one sense, Electronic was a sanctuary for both Bernard and myself, because Bernard, he had got to a place with New Order. New Order as a band had got to a place where they were really huge, particularly in America, and they were doing arenas, which was a kind of relatively new thing. It's a new experience for indie rockers, really. It was the early days of that happening to Depeche Mode and happening to The Cure. They were sort of, part of an elite. And with that comes a lot of pressure and a lot of energy. So I think he'd come at the end of that. And I think also that kind of mainstream activity kind of goes against Bernard's nature, really, and it goes against his punk rock Joy Division roots.
I just knew, I felt that it hurt when I was doing stuff with New Order. I felt that it hurt. It felt like I was being hit with a stick, and it's not very nice being hit with a stick. So you go somewhere where you're not being hit with a stick.
With both these Mancunian musicians experiencing tumultuous dynamics in other areas of their lives, a collaboration made sense.
You know, from my point, the Smiths had split, and I was looking to get away from really all the fallout of that, but I still wanted to make music. So that's one side of it. But the other side really is that it wasn't just that we were running away from something. The two of us, as I remember it, were definitely running towards something as well. Because both of us as individual musicians and being the type of people we both are, we both sensed there was a sea change, or we both wanted to do something different.
Electronic was born out of restlessness, a desire to rip it up and start again.
We just wanted to close the shutters, lock the door, and do something creative and write songs, really, and explore and educate ourselves. Because what you've got to remember is self-taught musicians, so it's important to write, because every time you write a song, you're educating yourself and you're teaching yourself something about the art of songwriting. And, you know, if you don't write songs, there'd be nothing else. There would be no tours. There would be no interview. There'd be nothing.
It's too easy to say that Electronic was a sanctuary and a refuge from New Order and the Smiths. That doesn't get you very far, and it doesn't get the music written. You can't write out of a negative. You have to write out of actually wanting to create something, not just want to run away from something. So it was incredibly creative.
One of the first songs to emerge out of this new collaboration was Getting Away With It, which featured vocals by Pet Shop Boys' Neil Tennant. He saw it as a way to doff his cap to the Mancunian music he'd always loved.
I was thinking about Morrissey. I've been getting away with it all my life. I was kind of me pretending to be Morrissey. I've been walking in the rain just to get wet on purpose. I've been forcing myself not to forget, just to feel worse. I've been getting away with it all my life.
I've been getting away with it all my life.
Recording with Electronic was also an opportunity to get up close and personal with characters that had taken on near mythical proportions in Neil's mind.
Rob Gretton would come in and say, "Sounds like Phil Collins to me." And I would say, "No, it doesn't." I remember he commented on what a nightmare I must be to manage, because I was so opinionated about everything.
Rob Gretton might not have fully understood what Electronic were trying to achieve, but then that makes sense. His priority was keeping New Order together. He'd never been a fan of solo work.
We'd all done things outside of the band. Rob was very disappointed when we all started producing other people and using New Order's gear to do the productions.
I love you more than you love me. However I look, it's clear to see.
We actually all started branching out, and that was why Rob wanted us all to be under the collective name of B Music, because he didn't want anybody to know, or he didn't want to encourage the fact of you doing something on your own. So any production that was done for Factory or anybody was down as B Music production. And he didn't want anybody doing anything outside of the group.
But eventually, even Rob Gretton had to accept the inevitable. The group didn't want to be a group anymore. Perhaps he thought letting Bernard pursue his work with Johnny would get the whole thing out of his system. Stephen Morris.
I think Rob thought, well, let's just sort it out, which it generally does. It generally does. When bands do solo albums, you realise how difficult it is, and you were better off where you were in the first place. But I mean, some things go a bit deeper than that.
All of the band's assorted side projects did well. When Electronic's album came out in 1991, it went to number 2 in the charts, very nearly matching New Order's career best Technique.
Suggest that I'm selfish. I've been trying to...
Hookie's later side project, Monaco, would also score chart hits. And yet, for long-time fans, inevitably, there was something strange about hearing the composite parts of New Order individually. Kevin Cummins.
You know, electronic was great, but it was lacking Hookie's bass. And Monaco, I really liked, but it needed Bernard and Gillian. It needed other elements. And that's what made New Order great. And I sometimes think when you're very close to it, like obviously they're right in the centre of it, they don't see that themselves. They don't like me saying that, by the way. I've said that to them in the past and they don't agree. But, you know, you don't see it. You kind of don't see it the way that fans or people around the band might see that.
That phenomenon isn't unique to New Order. It's part of the strange alchemy of music, full stop. Andrew O'Hagan.
You know, Morrissey is a terrific lyricist, but he's never been as good without Marr. He just didn't have anybody who managed to sort of, you know, link up all the proteins in his DNA the way that Marr managed to. And that's just a fact to me. New Order, similarly, they sort of, you know, I think bands are like families in that way. You know, they fuck each other up, but they create magic. There's no choice. You can't have a second family, really. They can try. But the magic's the magic. And they were magic. I mean, they were the perfect band in that moment.
Rob Gretton and Tony Wilson always supported New Order in all their creative endeavours, together and apart. But from the wings, they were willing the band back together. And in 1990, an opportunity for reunion presented itself. Meet a man called David Bloomfield.
At the time, I was the press officer for the Football Association and the England team.
As a one-man band of a press officer, David was responsible for just about all the promotion of the England team as they geared up for their next major tournament, the 1990 World Cup in Italy.
So one night, watching TV, there was a programme on. It was called Best and Marsh, and it was George Best and Rodney Marsh would talk about and have a laugh about various football clips. And it was on for about half an hour. And at the end of the credits, when the credits are rolling, I saw there was a picture of George Best dribbling and the credits coming past. And the music was by New Order. And literally in an instant, I knew what I had to do. It really was like, they talk about these light bulb moments. So I actually ran to the office the next day and phoned Tony Wilson. And I eventually got through to him at the Granada Studios. And I said, I'm David Bloomfield from the Football Association. Would New Order like to record the 1990 World Cup song for the players? And to, I think, Tony's everlasting credit, in an instant, he said yes. That was his one-word reply.
And the band's response when they caught wind of this plan?
Fuck off! 2 words, Tony. 2 words. 3 words. World Cup Willie. Fucking shit idea. There's never been a decent football song.
What exactly would Ian Curtis and the rest of them have made of that idea more than a decade earlier?
In a pub in Manchester, someone come up and say, you write a song for the FA, I'd have gone, are you serious? No fucking way. Not that I didn't want to, it's just that you couldn't have foreseen it happening.
And yet there was something perversely appealing about the offer.
What can I say? Tony's very persuasive.
As far as Tony was concerned, this would be the perfect opportunity to remind New Order of priority number 1.
The idea was, I think, that they would get them all back together and I'll be mates again.
Never mind that at this stage, the band were barely on speaking terms, let alone making World Cup anthem terms.
So it's like, oh, right, well, nobody's got any ideas because we've not been writing together. So me and Stephen because we had a little studio in our cellar, because we continued doing soundtrack music. So we came up with the basis of World in Motion.
So in the course of me and Gillian's soundtrack writing, we'd done 2 tunes. We said, well, what do you think of these? I said, yeah, this one's okay. Right, we'll work on this. I can do next Friday between 2 and 3. Okay, when can you do it? 4 and 5. You know, so it was slightly complicated, but that's how it started.
Conflicting schedules aside, the machinery cranked back into gear, just as it always had. With one notable exception this time, the band didn't have a clue how to approach the lyrics.
The band, as I understood from Tony, weren't natural football fans. They were on board for the project 100%, but they needed to call in the famous football supporter Keith Allen to make it sound authentic in terms of its football terminology.
This series started with an unruly comedian getting kicked off the stage while opening for New Order at a miner's benefit. It's only fitting then that he should take to the stage once more for an encore. Ladies and gentlemen, Keith Allen.
And I'll never forget it. My wife at the time was away with the children, so I had the flat to myself, so quite close to Soho. And I'd been at Legends nightclub on a Saturday night, you know, just completely off it. Anyway, I knew that I had to go down to Peter Gabriel's studio on the Sunday. So, of course, being the idiot that I was, just I'll stay up all night, it'll be fantastic.
At 7 a.m, Keith set off for Bath, armed only with a cassette of an instrumental that New Order had given him.
So I got on the train, I thought, I actually better listen to this tune. So I sat there, you know, just hung out to dry, basically, on the train, listening to this tune. And got down to Peter Gabriel's studio. And I'd written down, you know, a verse, blah, blah, blah. So I get in there. They said, oh, you all right? I said, yeah. What have you got? And I went, oh, here we go. Look, here it is. E is for England. England starts with E. We'll all be smiling when we're in Italy. Thinking that was an incredibly witty observation about ecstasy. And David Bloomsbury went, fuck off, you're insane. The FA will never accept that. We can't do that.
The first World in Motion session hit a roadblock fairly early on. Stephen Hague was subsequently drafted in to see if he could establish some order. Not long after, Keith was invited to another session at a different studio.
And Stephen Hague was there. And then he played what he'd been doing, you know, the previous couple of days. Had he been working on it? And he was like, fuck me, it's a completely different song. You know, he'd put in the chorus, he'd put in various melody lines that had never been there, that I'd heard anyway. So it was very much on the hoof. And I believe it or not, for some reason, Craig Johnston was there. He's played for Liverpool. And it was his idea to have a rap. You know, no, it wasn't the band's idea. It wasn't Stephen Hague's idea. It was Craig Johnston's idea. So I thought, all right, I better write a rap then.
After all, players from the England World Cup squad were to join the recording session later that day, and they'd need something to sing. Keith needed inspiration, and fast.
And the England players hadn't arrived yet. So Tony said, and of course, Tony's Jag. I mean, it was like the fucking Batmobile, Tony's Jag. It was his pride and joy. You know, the great sound system in it. It was just it was a real gangster's fucking poser car. He said, come with me, we'll go and pick Bernard up at the hotel in Henley. All right, we did. So we got there. I'm sure Bernard won't mind. I don't know if his kids are listening, but he used to take drugs, kids, we all did. Anyway, he's planted one up the business end of his nose, and we've got in the car. Bernard had a Boots bag, which he puked up in. I'll never forget it, in the back. And Tony's playing the track. And I'm going, play that again. It's just horrendous.
Undeterred by his previous brush with the censorship of the FA, Keith Allen was determined to write a rap to remember.
Basically, if you break it down, most of it is either homosexual innuendo or drug-taking innuendo. You know, you've got to hold and give and do it at the right time. You can be slow, fast, but you must get to the line. You know, it's all about referencing drugs, homosexual activity. So I'm furiously trying to write this. And there was this one bit, and I always wanted, it's one-on-one, which was, you know, that was the big thing of the day. You on one? You on one? That's where that came from, one-on-one. You know, there's a football reference, which is one-to-one marking. So it's quite clever, if you ask me. But there was this one bit, and I was thinking, oh, what can I put in there? And I remember saying to Tony, is arrivederci an Italian word? Yes, it is. So I think he mastered in classics, actually, Tony. Oh, thank you, Tony. And that's where it came from. Riva, it could have been anything. It could be spaghetti, hoops, one-on-one.
And that's why they pay him the big bucks. Just like that, the rap was written. Now they just had to record it.
The most surreal bit was getting the team in, which was kind of like, I thought we'd get away with just doing a song, but eventually it was kind of like, no, you've got to get the squad in to do the traditional shouting. And they turned up at the Mail studio and Stephen Egg freaked out. And it turned out they were of the same opinion as me, that football songs were shite. And why are we doing this? And they all had to be bribed to turn up.
The only reason they were there is because I think they got 300 quid each for being in it. You know, in those days, you know, it was a bit of money, well, why not? I mean, there was no kind of, you know, nobody bothered to ask anyone, can you sing or can you do anything?
On the day, 5 players turned up at first. Peter Beardsley, Steve McMahon, Chris Waddle, Des Walker and John Barnes. Each had a go at Keith's freshly written rap.
I think there's a Peter Beardsley version knocking about, which is probably best not heard.
To hold and give, but at the right time. You can be slow or fast, but you must get to the line. They'll always hit you and hurt you, defend and attack. There's only one way to beat them, get around the back. Catch me.
As it turned out, none of the athletes in attendance could exactly be described as naturals in the booth.
I mean, Steve McMahon rapping, I mean, it's a joy to behold on many levels. One, it's completely arrhythmic. 2, it's toneless. 3, it's like, it just reminded me of, you know, monks in Tudor, in the medieval times or something, intoning. You've got to hold and give, do it at the right time. Jesus Christ.
It wasn't the most promising of starts, but England's star midfielder was about to arrive. Like a prophet from the faraway lands of Newcastle, the one, the only, Paul Gascoigne.
Who arrives late but Gaza in a Merc? And I watched him drink 3 bottles of champagne in 2 hours. Pop, drinking it, you know. So we get Gaza in, and then the first thing he says when he gets in the studio, you see this pop cover, for the people at home, it's a piece of nylon on a round frame that stops your voice popping. Fucking hell, Beardo, your wife's knickers here in front of the mic. And it's like, oh, here we go. So then he starts, and he hits it like that. He's got the tempo, he's got the rhythm of it, he's got everything bang on it, but you cannot understand one word of what he's saying. Right, lads, you got to hold and give up, you will not the right time. Be slow or fast, but do it in the lane.
In the end, everyone agreed that the best man for the job was midfielder John Barnes.
And then you've got Barnesy, which again is a unique interpretation of rapping. and that's how it happened, you know.
You got to hold and give, but do it at the right time. You can be slow or fast, but you must get to the line. They'll always hit you and hurt you, defend and attack. There's only one way to beat them, get round the back.
And just like that, on the brink of breaking up altogether, New Order accidentally found themselves with the biggest hit of their career.
in the face of all this adversity, we ended up with our only number one single with a comedian and a football team.
And for all the anarchy of its recording, World in Motion made a genuine impact on the culture of the time. Kevin Cummins.
I thought it was great because football was really, really in doldrums, wasn't it, in England at the time? And I moved to London from Manchester in 1987, and I'd go back every week to watch Man City. And people would be, record company people would be saying, do you want to go to Paris this weekend? Such and such a band are playing, let's go, let's do this. And I'd say, no, I'm going to Manchester. And I'd say, well, what are you going there for? And I'd say, to watch Man City. And it'd be like, what, football? You actually watch football? Like it was such a dirty word. And that massively helped to reinvent it. It was great. And then suddenly, all these people who'd been slagging us all off for watching football all decided they had to have their own team.
It was, right time, right place, not just for me, but for the band and for that tune. And also that very hot summer, 1990. Because what it meant was you had this head-on collision of club culture and football culture meeting during the daytime in people's back gardens. And what would happen is people would go out clubbing on a Friday night, stay up, and then they'd all be awake, on Saturday with their wives and girlfriends. And, they'd have parties, you'd have football parties, which were attended by people who were essentially clubbers. So suddenly you have this community who are interested in football you'd never had before, which involved women, and it opened up football to a new audience. And it was instrumental in doing that song at that time, without a shadow of a doubt.
It certainly wasn't a logical move for New Order. But then, what about this band is logical? Peter Hook can't help but remember a conversation with the frontman of black country glam rockers, Slade.
It's like when Noddy Alder said to me, he said, what you want to do, Hooky, is stop messing around with all these tunes and just do a Christmas song. So you get money once a year. But we did it and we get money once every 4 years, which has got to be better than none. And we did think that it might lead to that wonderful, wonderful prize that every group aspires to, the Eurovision Song Contest.
So, at the start of the final decade of the 20th century, we are, no doubt, a long way from where this story began. We're a long way from that freezing Manchester warehouse where 4 moody punks first picked up their instruments and discovered, between them, something primitive but powerful. We're a long way from the deep, dark world of Joy Division and from the enigmatic cool of New Order as they made their first tentative steps into the light. We're all the way up in the stands at Main Road, bellowing along with a crowd of thousands, the unlikely Manchester sun beaming down on our smiling faces. Bernard Sumner once described World in Motion as the last straw for Joy Division fans. And you have to imagine, he was smiling when he said that.
3, 5, 0, 1, 2, 5, go!
Andrew O'Hagan.
I was never into football. In fact, the only low moment for me in the whole career of New Order is that World Cup anthem thing, which I've lived in England for long enough to have swallowed that particular bitter pill. But no, seriously, it was quite nice to see that a proper band could actually be drafted in for such a horrendous gig as that.
If there's one thing we know about this band, it's that you should always expect the unexpected. The only constant is change. And even when you think it's all over, of course, it never really is. After World in Motion, the band would take a proper long hiatus. New Order's future hung in the balance. But there would be more surprises to come a few years down the line.
By that time, with the Hacienda and Factory was unravelling anyway. And so we ended up in a situation where everybody was doing these other things, which didn't really do Factory any good. That's another story, which begins with, the reason Factory's in so much fucking trouble is because New Order haven't done another record.
We needed to get back together again to save Factory, to save the Hacienda, as Rob said, because we had all these personal guarantees we were going to lose everything if we didn't save them. And Rob said, you're going to have to do it. You've got no choice, you're going to have to do it.
There's a whole other story there. The collapse of a record company, the closure of a nightclub, the fractious dynamics of a group who've spent more than a decade living in each other's pockets. There's more death to render New Order leaderless once again. 2 major blows, the passing first of Rob Gretton and then Tony Wilson. A vacuum at the heart of Manchester and this most Mancunian of bands. And there's more life too, of course, more music. Some of it made under trying circumstances, but all of it true to what and who they were.
The phenomenal thing about New Order through that period with Factory is that it was all true. You know, they seemingly never did anything that they didn't want to do. And they certainly didn't do anything much that anyone else told them to do. And I think that was like one of the pillars of the respect and love that people had for them, and to some extent still have for them. You could actually believe in New Order. It didn't really matter whether you liked it or not, or whether you thought that their latest release was as good as their previous one, but you could believe in it. And there's not actually a lot in pop culture, and certainly by the time you get towards the end of the century, there's not a lot left to believe in.
Well said, Mr. Saville. And it's a sentiment echoed by none other than The Cure's Robert Smith.
We felt perhaps there's a sense of competition. Some members of the band, of both bands, felt there was a competition. I never really did. I was always a New Order fan. I've always been a New Order fan. They're one of the bands which, when they release something, I always listen to what it is. I don't always like it, but I always know why they're doing it and what it sounds like is going to be great. People often complain about how, as the evening grows late, when I throw certain soirees, how much New Order actually comes on post 3 a.m. So it's but yeah, a fantastic band, one of the best.
One of the very best. A shape-shifting entity, adapting to whatever cultural or personal changes were thrust in their path. How on earth did they not only survive, but thrive amongst all that turmoil? Musician Hannah Peel.
Well, I think when you suffer grief or loss in quite a big way, and then when they embraced it from the Joy Division into the New Order, and there's almost like a melancholy to their music that mixed with those beats. I think that's why I always think they've been through something, they've seen something, and it just almost triggered them to almost view life in a different way. They were so young, and it just changed their sound, and I wonder if it would have happened if we hadn't lost,
This is a band for whom success and tragedy were always intertwined.
There was one thing I can always remember, because the subject of Ian never really came up. It wasn't, you hadn't forgotten about him, but it never really came up, so you never talked about it. But I always remember, out of the blue, in the dressing room after a gig, Rob said, "You know something? Fucking Joy Division revival. It's going to be fucking mega. It's going to be fucking mega. So I bet you tenner. Fucking got to be mega." And it's like, no, it's not going. It's not going to happen. And then it did, because you forget at the time that while we were doing all this sort of philandering and what have you, and exploring rock and roll hedonism, there was this thing called Joy Division, which had just been there. It was just there.
Don't walk away in silence. See the danger, always danger.
When you're walking around somewhere in the world and there's people with Joy Division t-shirts on, my thought all the time is, wow, everyone thought we were weirdos. Why don't you get a proper job, you weirdos?
New Order have always been resolutely themselves, and nothing that could come after would change that. Not the end of Factory, nor the breakups, the reunions, and the breakups again. As I said, that's not a story for now. What I want to leave you with instead is the image of a band who couldn't help but return. Like homing pigeons, they would always find their way back. To Manchester, for one thing.
New Order gave Manchester a place to socialise, a place to dream, music to have babies by, meet their friends by, gigs to remember for the rest of their lives, record collections to treasure. It's like New Order have given people in Manchester everything. Everything.
A band who returned to their fans.
We grew up with those bands in a very literal sense. They were young, like we were young. You know, the communion between performer and audience was so direct in those years. You know, if you loved a band like New Order, you loved them from single to album to album to single to single to album and to live gig across the country for years. You literally became old with these bands. And they had started off seeming so box fresh, so amateur, so amazingly new to the scene, with an absolutely new attitude and a new sound, that you thought, they're going to eternally be as young as this. We're all going to eternally be as young as this. We're always going to be in this venue listening to the most perfect band.
Walking on air.
Of course, that's a fallacy. What happens is that you get older, your record collection gets dusty, you have to buy the CDs to make up for the albums that you no longer play on vinyl. Years later, you're building a Spotify list of those same songs in those same order. That's called a life in pop culture. You know, it was a constant love affair.
To me, it feels like they feel like beautiful memories, and I mean that in the most positive sense. Like every track just feels like a certain point in your life or a time spent with friends that you'll never forget. And they feel like real like companions, the songs. I really love them for that.
New Order returned to the people who had made them, the motley crew of Factory and all its moving cogs.
People actually want to know what Factory Records was, what Tony Wilson was, what Pete Salvo was, what Gretton was, what Martin Hannett was. You know, you have to think of like Hollywood or something in the 1940s and people like Daryl Zanuck or sort of, you know, Harry Connick, these sort of like maestri who were able to gather brilliant talents from the art department and the sound department and then the great actors and the wonderful musicians and put them in the right place at the right time and pay for it. You know, it's like that. It's like what used to be called the factory system in the Hollywood studios. And there it is at Factory, accidentally, you know, all these haphazard characters falling in from the pub. But actually what they had was a tremendous sense of how to make hay while the sun shone, how to turn this bunch of ne'er-do-wells into sort of the coolest band in Europe. I mean, that's quite an achievement.
They'd all started together as Warsaw. And they'd gone all the way through everything with Joy Division and Ian. And yeah, he was like a fifth member of the band, really, Rob. They did the music and he did their careers.
You know, it started with Joy Division, but essentially New Order became my medium. They were doing what they wanted to do. And that enabled me, and they made it possible for me to do what I wanted to do.
And ultimately, New Order gave everything to each other.
I mean, I was 21 when I joined the band, and it's only recently my mum died, and we was at my mum's funeral, and my auntie said, do you think your mum and dad like you being away? I said, yeah, it was great. She said, well, that's not what I've heard.
They never actually, during that time, they never really split up. There was times when they didn't see each other for long periods, but I can say that Bernard never really left the group. He never left the group. So, in other words, even when they weren't making music, he had responsibilities. And I don't think he ever left the group in his heart either, really.
All those disputes and all that conflict and all that hatred that there appeared to be,
this was mad and it was horrible and people died and it was chaos, but it never seemed to ultimately interfere with what emerged from within it, with these, even if there's just 10 or 15 unbelievably transcendent moments. And so around it was all these arguments and all this sort of violence and hatred, but at the center of it was absolutely real love.
More than once in this series, you've heard New Order referred to as a family. And that's the way it was. They were tied to each other, whether they liked it or not.
You could say it was momentum. You could say that it was inevitable. You could say that, no matter how hard you tried, you could not extricate yourself from it.
Nothing would have stopped us. Nothing did stop us, did it? Ian's death didn't stop us, Martin's death didn't stop us, getting all the equipment stolen didn't stop us, Rob's death didn't stop us, Tony's death didn't stop us, and nothing stops us. Because there was no day job, you see. There was nothing to go back to, there was no plan B, no other option.
So I'm wary to call this the end of anything. New Order don't do endings. So see you next time, maybe, for more transmissions from the world of Joy Division and New Order. You've been listening to Transmissions, the definitive story of Joy Division and New Order. This was a Cup and Nuzzle production for Warner Music and New Order. It was presented by me, Elizabeth Hulker, and produced by Frank Palmer. Executive producers for Cup and Nuzzle were Matt Everett and Graham Hodge. Executive producer for Warner Music was Stuart Wheeling. With special thanks to Rebecca Bolton and Andy Robinson from Prime Management. And of course, our gratitude to Bernard, Gillian, Peter and Stephen. Archive from the film Shadow Players comes courtesy of James Nice. Material from the film New Order Story was used with the permission of Warner Music. Additional archive from Kino Library. Our head of production was Rebecca Mills. Our production manager was Sarah Garcia Anderson. Our associate producer was Katia Rio. Our production coordinators were Ruby Fraser and Maxine Taylor. Our engineers were Chris Denman and Joe Foley. Our editors were Alex Bernard and Max Bauer. Mix and mastering was by Granny Eats Wolf. Thank you once again for listening to Transmissions. And do remember, dreams never end.
You never know. Time yet, maybe. We will reunite for the Eurovision Song Contest. What finer time could there be than now? Wow, there's a thought.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please give us a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcasts.